Hi, everybody. My name is Natalie Yeadon. I'm the CEO and co-founder with Impetus Digital. At Impetus Digital, we have built some of the best in class, asynchronous and synchronous virtual collaboration and communication tools. Over the past 13 years, we have worked with life science companies from across the globe. We've been helping them with everything from creating virtual advisory boards to virtual investigator meetings, medical education programs, and hybrid meetings. And since the launch of our award-winning Insight Events platforms, we've been also helping companies with corporate events, sales training, hackathons, and everything in between. But more importantly, at Impetus, we really believe that everything starts with a conversation. And from these big, hairy, audacious conversations with some of the leading edge thinkers, the digital provocateurs, we can all work to collectively and positively disrupt healthcare. But we can't just end it here. We need to continue these conversations. It's precisely the reason we have launched the Insight platform so that we can have a series of asynchronous and synchronous touch points so that we can move these agendas forward. So I'm really happy to having one of these digital thought leaders at the table with me today. This is actually Hicham Naim. He's actually a clinical pharmacist by training. He has a doctorate degree in pharmacy and an MBA. He is also a certified customer experience professional. Hicham has over 20 years hands-on experience in the healthcare industry, from strategy to implementation. Hicham has started his career as a clinical pharmacist in the early 2000s, before he started working in the pharmaceutical industry and management consulting industries. Hicham is now the global head of the integrated and personalized care program at Takeda in the digital advisory board area. And previous to that, Hicham was leading the strategy and business operations for Europe and Canada, and was the head of customer experience strategy and operations. Hicham is also a mentor of several digital therapeutic startups, as well as the founder of a great website called Curated Health. Welcome, Hicham. So happy to have you on the show today.
Hello, Natalie. Welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
Beautiful. I want to say, so a really interesting background and some really interesting work that you are doing in the whole digital space at Takeda, but you have a clinical pharmacy background. How on earth did you end up on the digital side of things? So tell us a little bit about where you and how you landed where you are today.
Yeah, of course. I like to call myself not a digital strategist or a technologist, but rather a business strategist. And the way I approached it, digital, and the way I do it today, it's more from the business side or from the clinical side rather than technology side. I mean, I was talking to a colleague this morning. We were talking about the concept of digital transformation, and we were talking about the fact that today every business is digital by definition, and almost everyone within the organization, whether it's Takeda or any organization, hospitals, pharma, they need to have a say, and they need to be involved in digital.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you were just at the right place at the right time, and you had a digital mind and a great business mind. And so that's what brought you to where you are today. So there are lots of really interesting topics that pharmaceutical companies are investigating today. And again, we hear the word digital transformation. Certainly, COVID-19 has had a dramatic impact on the way people are synthesizing all things digital. But maybe before we get into that, let's actually share a little bit about your own personal story with COVID-19 and some of the learnings or aha moments that have inspired you since that experience.
Yes, of course. So I got COVID back on April. I got actually from my son from the kindergarten. So we did everything that you can do to protect yourself, but at the end, you can't protect from your kids. So he got it from the kindergarten, and unfortunately, after 10 days, I was a lucky one to get it, and also my wife. And what was interesting with the disease is that it started like with a normal flu or cold, but on day 11, things start getting south. And basically, I had for almost 10 days between 39 and 41 degree temperature. it attacked not only my lungs, but also my stomach. So I couldn't drink water, so hydrate myself. So I ended up in ER actually. And what is interesting is that I was in the university hospital in Zurich, and they proposed me to be part of a clinical trial. So basically, during that event, I was the patient, but also I was involved for the first time in a clinical trial. And I mean, one of the aha moments that came is that we have one life, so we have to really to cheer our health. That's the most important asset. But also, you don't have a second chance. So if there is something that you're really keen to do, and if you have to balance between safety and purpose, then go for the purpose.
Mm.
The second aha moment, you know, I worked a lot in designing solutions for patient and HCP, and I always thought that patient, what they want first is I want the data and understand. But I realized as a patient, I don't want to know what will happen with my data. What I cared is just the physician makes the right choice for me, right decision choices. And basically, I trust them with the choice. And when they proposed me the clinical trial, I didn't spend, for instance, time reading the consent, what they will be doing with my data. What I did care about is what type of treatment is that? Will that help me? And will that contribute to the good of the other patient? Because the ultimate goal of this clinical trial is to develop a treatment that can help other patients. And that was a big aha moment.
It certainly is. And so I know that you dabble a lot in this area. We're hearing over and over about the big move that pharma has been making in a very patient-centric way, especially around decentralized trials and the whole dialogue around that since COVID. But you having encountered being an actual patient and really caring about what treatments you're going to get because you wanted to get over this COVID-19 condition, you saw this from a completely different perspective. We hear a lot about e-consents. We hear a lot about privacy issues, all these reasons why decentralized trials or all these other things that are preventing us from moving and accelerating in a digital way is not going to be feasible. Do you think that we've got this wrong? Do you think a lot more patients are like you, or is privacy really a thing?
No, I believe privacy is the thing, and you know, trust is the most important currency in the healthcare business or healthcare ecosystem, and we can't basically dismiss the importance of privacy. But what I'm saying, it's less importance about the privacy, but more around the patient. They don't necessarily think that ownership of data is critical for them, or they don't want to own the data. What they want to understand is, what can I do with my data and how my data can help me? Otherwise, you know, collecting data and providing this data to patients without providing them a layer of insight to them, and what does it mean for them to improve the healthcare, the condition, the habit, this will create just confusion within patient. You mentioned the word patient centricity. I think what's happened between now, today, and 10 years ago, there's a shift from, and I like to use those two parallelism, moving from being patient-centered to patient-centric. It's a big difference, and I have seen many times people, when they write an article or they talk about that, they tend to use those two concepts, if they are the same, but they are two different things. Patient-centered, do everything around the patient, but it implies that patient is somehow passive. Well, patient-centric, patients are part of the solution. They are on the table. They have their say. And I think, and they are still one of the most underutilized asset in healthcare system. So what I have observed is pharma is moving away from the concept of patient-centered, I know what is good for you, to more a collaborative approach with patient, with patient organization, with HCP, and start, I'm doing what is good for you rather than I know what is good for you.
So if patients are so underutilized, or we're just on the precipice of becoming so much more focused on patient centricity, is what can we do to bring the patient into the equation, making it much more fundamentally part of the pharmaceutical business model?
I think this is the element of, of any partnership, whether it's with patient organization, or with other key stakeholder. There are some criteria that you need to put on the table. The very first element with patient, we have to talk to them if they're adult, and agree with them what are the common intent between pharma, healthcare provider, and patient organization. That's the very first thing. Second thing is transparency. I mean, it's okay if you explain to patient that, yes, we are a company. I'm talking about pharma now. We are for-profit organization. It's okay. But if you are transparent and clear about your intent with them, you're already building the right foundation for collaboration. And second element is sometimes we tend, whether it's industry or healthcare provider, we tend to adopt a paternalistic approach to our patient. And I think we need to switch the language. The best person to understand the condition is the patient, because they live this condition. And we need to be respectful and listen to them and involve them and talk to them as if they are a part, or like I said, the solution, and not being part of the problem. You are the patient. We know what is good for you.
100%. Yeah, totally makes sense, Hicham. Now, we did talk about the pivotal confluence of disruption that happened since COVID-19. The world shifted on its axis, and a lot of terrible things, but there was also a lot of silver linings in this. What would you suggest were some of the things as it relates to the changes that pharmaceutical companies have included, specifically around things like omnichannel and multiple strategies and hybrid meetings? What was your thoughts on some of the fundamental benefits and positive changes that that pharmaceutical companies have incorporated?
So I think let's talk about omnichannel, because you're talking here about customer engagement. I don't believe that COVID was disrupting that, but rather accelerating that, because the movement started, I would say, in the early 2010s, and pharma, most of the time, they are behind FMCG and other industry. So you had some effort to do a hybrid model or doing physical and digital engagement, but COVID helped accelerate the change and accelerate the change from the two sides, because first, from the customer side, if you look to NHS or other, they have quickly switched to telemedicine and as faster as expected, and that helps a lot the adoption of the digital engagement with pharma or with other stakeholders. In pharma, we had some resistance, because you have basically the customer-facing people that are digital savvy, and they have adopted those new engagement. But you have an old generation of field sales reps, key account manager, medical science liaison, and so on, that were resistant because they didn't see the value of this. And I think what helps, it has accelerated this movement. Having said that, I think there are much greater impact of COVID beyond that. One of that I believe will have impacted longer term is, do we really believe in the future that we need the same engagement with customer? We still have a lot of commercial engagement, medical engagement, and in-field market access, but in the future, do we really believe that we need the same engagement model? I'm not talking about digital, because digital is an enabler, but I think some pharma will start now thinking about, do we need to keep the same engagement model with the different customer, whether it's HCP.
Let's actually double click on that, because it's a very interesting philosophical question. And so in the legacy model, we were bound by geographical barriers, right? So to be able to entangle or meet with or engage, there had to be some sort of a physical proximity, hence the number of sales reps, MSLs, the multiduplicity of those same kind of medical education events, and on it goes. Now, again, using the digital enablers, you have an opportunity of a one-to-many. So with that in mind, is that what you're meaning by a change in the engagement model?
Somehow, yes. What I'm thinking, there's not one pharma. We have to always think that there are multiple pharma based on their own portfolio and based on what's the intent of engagement with a customer. If you have, for instance, portfolio in oncology, most of the time, the doctor, the oncologist, they know more in terms of science than the field researchers. And what they want is to interact more with medical science like liaison. And in this model, do we need commercial team in the future in oncology, for instance? I don't have the answer, but it's a question to cover. If you're in primary care, maybe you need to have those sales reps, because you still need to have some detailing, whether it's face-to-face or via digital. So in the one-to-many, maybe the interaction will be different depending on which therapy area you are present. Now, you talked about something about COVID. I think one of the most impact I have observed due to COVID, I think it's two. The first one is that finally the general public start understanding the value of pharma. The reputation score was really up during COVID. So they start understanding that pharma has also a role to play within the healthcare system. The second one that I found that can be, I won't say disruptive because I don't like this word, but can have huge impact in the future, is that a lot of pharma start collaborating together, whether to develop, for instance, a treatment for COVID, or to share data, or to develop, or to advance the development of vaccines. And I think this new way of working between different pharma will stay here, because now they have basically broke some walls that they were like a virtual walls for me. Now they start thinking of the value of collaborating together, opening their own data, sharing that for the good, for the whole healthcare system. And I think this would have a huge impact in the future.
It's actually beautifully said, Hicham. And I think many of us who come from, like you're saying, the old school world, there was very much of competitive boundaries that were set up and complete know-how of doing that type of collaboration. And certainly, as you've alluded to, COVID-19 has blasted the doors open on collaboration. So as a strategist or business strategist, what's your thoughts about the new business models that are exposed or open to pharma, going beyond the concept of the beyond the pill strategies, but really talking about the new formulation of how companies are going to make money in the future?
Well, in short term, I mean, we don't have unlimited resource in healthcare system. And in short term, if the regulation and if the policymaker allow that, you will have collaboration between pharma. If I take an example, oncology, for instance, most of the time you have cocktail therapy, and those are very expensive treatment. You can imagine in the future that pharma will collaborate together to come up with one pricing model for a cocktail coming from different pharma. Of course, here the limitation is the antitrust law. How can you do that while staying compliant to laws and regulation? That's one. If you ask me in the future, I think one of the thing I hope in the future, maybe in 10, 20 years from now, is that patient and general public will play a role in the investment in new drug delivery. What I mean by that, for instance, imagine that with blockchain now you will have token where a patient organization or general public can have some of those tokens and contribute basically to finance or to fund R&D. And hopefully you will have different models then. Pharma is not taking the full risk of drug development. It can share this risk. And as a counterpart, the pricing will be a little bit more accessible and affordable. That's my dream. I don't know if it will happen, but maybe in 20 years, who knows?
I'm sort of smiling because your thinking is extremely advanced. And I have a tendency to kind of like to linger in the future a bit as well. But unfortunately, every time I bring up the idea of NFTs and blockchain and the whole piece around that. I think a lot of times people's eyes glaze over, but there is a potential reality to this so just sort of breaking this down for people listening. So one of the opportunities really has to do with the start of decentralized trials and the ability for us to capture data in a way that was never possible before, using things like sensors and ambient biometrics. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts about potentially leveraging that as a linchpin, if you will, to a lot more around how discovery is going to happen in the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah, I mean, this one has the potential, basically. So what's happened, the context, what's happened during COVID-19 is that one of the issue we had, whether it's Takeda or any other pharma, we had to stop many clinical trials because the healthcare system had to prioritize basically treating the patient with COVID. The value of using decentralized clinical trial and those new technology, first, you can start doing those in a more decentralized way. You can collect the data more efficiently, but also you can find insight that you couldn't find before. Most of the trial today is they're still doing with the paper-based, which is a bit I don't know how you say that in English.
Fabricated.
Yeah. So the value of decentralized clinical trial, it will make it more efficient and more effective. But in the future, you talked about NFT. Maybe patient will own those NFTs, will own their own clinical, their own data, their own whether it's a blood test or a genetic test, and they might basically, pharma could then pay them back for those NFTs. But imagine the future that we go beyond clinical trial where pharma or other research group could buy those NFTs from healthy population also, and use that to fund, and those healthy population could then buy futures for any potential drugs that can be developed in the future. Imagine, for instance, in your family you have a disease, and you don't know if you will have it when you will be 40, for instance, if it's a chronic disease. You might buy some features for a potential drug or therapy that can be benefit for you in 30 or 40 years from now. It's still science fiction. I don't know if it will happen, but many things that we thought won't happen, like going to the moon or even having the first, with Virgin, first tourist. So who would have imagined that 50 years ago?
It's just brilliantly said, and I'm sort of smirking to myself because these are some of the conversations that I have with people. It's nice to see somebody else talking about some of these kind of outlandish ideas. But here's the thing that's really interesting, and I'd love to get your take on this. Currently, the way we fund companies, again, big pharma, is they sell stocks. The stocks are for the big company. The big company has multiple drugs. Some of them are winners, some of them are losers, but you buy the whole kit and caboodle when you purchase a company stock. In the future, as you were suggesting, through blockchain and other sorts of ways of raising money, tokens, whatever you want to call them, there is a possibility that people can purchase the shares, if you will, by drug. If that's the case, what do you think the future of a company will look like in the future? Will it be a consolidation of interested investigators and people working together for a finite period of time, and then they move to the next deal? What does that look like? What will the company of the future look like?
Already, there's some change. I don't know if you have observed that, but whether it's pharma or in the industry in general, I think 2 or 3 years ago, 100 CEO published an opened in the New York Times, where they say they will not anymore look only to shareholder value, but also to the purpose and the value they deliver to their own employee. So, and you have a huge movement now on those social impact companies. I do believe maybe in the future, the social impact business model will be the norm. Not in 10 years, maybe a little bit further. And in this model, doing good to the society and making profit, those two things can go hands in hands. So it's beyond PR or CSR. I think the model will be that it's not only about thinking about shareholder value and profit. It's basically reinvesting the profit into R&D, but also the community could contribute to that. And I like the idea of maybe a patient, they have shares of product within a portfolio, because here then you are sharing the risk with the pharma or another new organization. And therefore you can also share the result or the outcome of this product development if it's successful.
So you're saying some really important things here, including the future endpoints of how we measure success. Right now, we have specific things in the P&L statement and net present value and everything else that we assess. We have standardized endpoints that we use, for example, in oncology studies, overall survival, et cetera. Are we moving into an era where it's no longer about these standardized, phase 3 clinical trial, standardized outputs, endpoints? Are we looking at things differently? Is there opportunity to look at things that are a little bit more resilient, as you've suggested, even in the business model, looking at maybe new social impact parameters or markers? What is this going to look like both at a clinical trial level as well as potentially endpoints on business measurement of success?
Yeah, so I believe that the science will remain the same. It will evolve, of course, with all the knowledge that we are collecting, but you will still have phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and also phase 4. I think that's critical. We have to maintain the science and the quality of the science, because this builds the right level of trust with the community. But imagine that in the future, the risk is not beared only by pharma, but maybe pharma, some payers, government, and how you measure the impact is not necessarily revenue or growth, but how many patients have been benefiting from this therapy, and how many patients have a positive outcome of this therapy. And in some case, the therapy might be a cure. This could be a good way to measure the impact of this new business model.
Yeah, 100%. It's a very exciting frontier. And healthcare is, and I know you don't like using this term, but highly disruptible right now because things aren't quite working the way they should be. And everybody and his brother is jumping into the market to try to change and modulate what is happening. So with all of that said, we've already talked a little bit about wearables. We've talked about sensors, ambient biometrics. Who's jumping into the scene, and who do you think some of the winners are going to be in this whole, biometric sensors, point of care at home?
So when we talk about digital, even if I don't like this word, digital transformation, I say we'd rather should use business or organization transformation. I think maybe there are two stories of digital here. There's a story of how can we do what we currently do better, more efficient and more effective. And that's where you talked an example with decentralized clinical trial. So how can you sensors, remote patient monitoring, RWE collection through digital platform. So you do what you do with clinical trial or healthcare delivery, but better using digital. The second movement of digital, it's taking the digital product as an asset itself. So where you have your chemical product, whether it's a pill or a cell and gene therapy or any based on your portfolio, but also you start developing a portfolio of digital product by themselves. And those digital products that either can help you diagnose or manage or even treat some conditions. And I think some pharma are starting now investing on that, and they understand the value of complementing their own portfolio with those assets. The best example, I think it was Pierce Therapeutic, who did a partnership now with Boygan and Gilham, if not mistaken, for mental health. That's an example because they have already a portfolio there, and they found an opportunity to complement this portfolio. Yeah. So those are, and you will have some winners, of course, but I believe the winners are the one who will take the digital product with the same level of discipline. Then they take their own traditional asset. What I mean by that is that they don't look to digital product like beyond the pill marketing gadget, but they truly believe that those products will have huge impact on patient, they're putting a lot of investment, and they're building an organization for that. It's not something you do as a sideshow.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's all really good points. One of the key things that companies are really racing to the forefront on is really trying to reduce the cost associated with discovery. Because again, this is what, we're talking about, the unsustainable healthcare costs associated with these CAR Ts and these immunotherapies and these mRNAs and everything else. So how do we get to discovery faster, quicker, less risk, and on it goes for all participants? The question comes down to is, how do we start leveraging some of the new technologies associated? I'm thinking specifically about quantum computing. I'm thinking about doing data in silica, 3D issue
digital
printing.
twins.
What's your thoughts about how can companies leverage technologies even in the realm of new discovery?
No, I've said it all. I mean, using in silica, for instance, and algorithm that can help you, that you can reduce basically not only the cost but also the time of drug development, because basically you can create almost like an avatar or digital twin, test multiple drug candidate before initiating a phase 1. So it has a huge potential. I think, like I said, the value of digital is there, and most of the pharma, they start understanding the value of that, especially in R&D. Because a couple of years ago, we talked a lot about digital in the commercial side, how to engage with customer. So then we moved to the supply chain. How can we create digital tool for machine that does like manufacturing pills or injectable? And now we move to R&D, especially with COVID, it has accelerated. So it has a huge potential to reduce the cost. But I still think that developing drug, the cost will stay high because of the fact that there are too many regulatory burden. And every time we have, let me open with every time we have a black sheep, something went wrong in a pharma, the whole pharma pay for it. And the implication that regulatory, they start putting more, I will not call them red tape, but more criteria to meet before you get your drug developed, authorized, and then reimbursed. So we still have those burdens. I think I'm not the expert here, but I will believe that while we are developing the regulatory, the digital part, I think there is some work to be done also on the regulatory side to see what are the areas that we can change to facilitate the drug development.
Just like we sometimes have to go outside of the structure or the company to find the solution, are we in a situation in the legacy scaffolding or framework of the pharmaceutical typical business model where we're going to have to go elsewhere? We're almost like the idea of a forest fire, where within the embers, you'll actually get new growth coming in. From a systems innovations thinking standpoint, and going back to basics and going back to the basic principles of the building blocks, is the legacy infrastructure so old and archaic and rickety that it can't solve the problem itself? Is there going to have to be a completely new framework paradigm that will have to crop up from somewhere else, maybe consumer electronics, elsewhere, that will in some ways topple or burn the old forest?
Probably. I don't know when, but probably yes. I mean, like you said, there's a legacy within the industry, and this legacy might be sometimes a barrier to innovation, and sometimes for a reason, because we want to stay compliant. I give you an example. For instance, to work with patients and to co-design with them solutions, it takes a lot of burden, basically, from the patient side and from the pharma side, to be compliant to every piece of documentation you need to use during this collaboration. And we're not, for instance, allowed to talk directly to patient. So imagine that you go beyond that. If you start developing drugs that might have impact on patients' life, it is somehow very hard to go outside the regulatory and compliance boundary. I believe that pharma could evolve fast if there is an open collaboration between regulators, policymakers, and the industry. And you can see it, for instance, FDA, they start realizing now they have to catch up with the whole movement of digital health. Now they set up their own center of excellence. They're almost like 5 to 10 years behind the evolution of the industry.
Yeah, no, it's an amazing thing to watch. And again, the good side about all of it, Hicham, is that at least the conversations are starting. That's at the very least that's happening. Just kind of step out of the regulatory discussion for a minute and sort of navigate a bit more on the future of how we're going to be managing wellness versus sickness care. Our typical current model, which is very expensive, is dealing with health from a reactive standpoint. So after people have the cardiometabolic syndrome or the obesity or whatever it is that the Alzheimer's, whatever is happening. In the future, is there an opportunity leveraging things like gene editing, genome testing, CRISPR, anything that's genetic specific, perhaps even some mandates of having that done at birth? So you're always having an N of 1, of always being able to assess your individual wellness factors based on your own baseline parameters. How can that potentially contribute to a completely different, more proactive care model?
To be honest, that would be scary, Natalie, because you open a huge ethical discussion here. What will happen then if the insurance company have access to those data and refuse to a particular patient group access to insurance and protection? If we take maybe disease, you can say there are the preventable one and the one you can't. For instance, there are some rare disease. You will have it because of your background, family background, but there are preventable disease you could delay. For instance, you talked about cardiovascular disease, mental health, Alzheimer. Maybe there are ways to prevent that. I do believe those in the future patient, because they will assume that there are some costs, they might adopt the right habit management. But again, it's always difficult in terms of behavior economics to decide whether I have now a nugget, a donut with chocolate and enjoy it now and be healthy in 30 years versus not enjoying now and being healthy in 30 years. Not being healthy if you have it. That's a very difficult. And I worked before during Takeda in different cardiovascular disease when I was at Ernst & Young, especially diabetes. And it's very hard to change the habit. And and personally, even if I work in a digital space, I don't believe if you provide wearables and data to patient, this will change their own habit. I think the real impact will be, it's not only the patient with the technology, but I believe there is a whole circle around the patient, the caregivers, the community. And I do believe today that the real approach toward care is not anymore a patient-centric care, but almost like an ecosystem-centric care, where you look to the needs of the patient, but also to the community, to the HCPs, and then design a system around all those different stakeholders to reach a common good and a common outcome. But I don't believe if we put everything on a patient, this will be successful, even if we have technology for that.
Yeah, very interesting perspective on that, Hicham. But I think we'll sort of see what evolves from that bioethical discussion for sure. I guess the other key issue also is, if we're not going to be able to be totally predictive at this stage, what about a sort of a little bit more of an immediate diagnosis? For example, rare diseases. We get to a place where somebody can be falsely diagnosed for years and years and years before they ever understand what their condition is. Now, in the future, with the use of algorithms and other sort of smart technologies, the idea of having digital biomarkers or surrogate biomarkers, or other types of diagnostics, being able to have liquid biopsies, things that people have leverage to, 24-hour glucose monitors. Are we at the forefront of being able to detect and monitor a lot sooner? And what could be the potential implications of that?
So let's talk about that, because you mentioned predictive, you mentioned a couple of things. I think the future is already here. If I take type of work I'm currently doing, for instance, with the team and the different functions within the organization, we're partnering with hospitals, for instance, and institute. If I take one example, Crohn's disease, and we have worked with different institutions, develop different set of algorithms. An example of algorithm can help you when you look to the genetic fingerprint of those patients to pick what is the right treatment for those patients. So then when they initiate in one type of treatment, it's the right treatment for them. Another type of algorithm is, can you predict the evolution of the disease itself based on this treatment? And you can look to either biomarkers or digital markers. And based on the behavior, based on like a inflammatory biomarker, is the patient now in control, or what's the probability of patient of having a positive or a negative progression of the disease? And based on that, you can then adjust your treatment. You talked about predictive. We're working on an algorithm that can take different set of data, whether it's a lab test or behavior data, biomarker, digital marker data, like for instance, stress level, body temperature, sleep quality, and you can predict whether they will have a flare. It's a probability. It's not 100% accurate, but it's still a probability. And you can say you have this probability to have basically this type to have a flare. And therefore, maybe you want to correct some of your habits, or maybe you need to talk with your physician to change the therapy. So this is already here, and a lot of pharma or healthcare provider are working on that. You talked about diagnosis for rare disease. On average, in a rare disease, a patient is diagnosed between 10 to 15 years. So it's a burden. And we have partnered with Eurodis, I don't know if you know them. It's and with Microsoft and other organizations to basically find a way to use data and algorithm to reduce this diagnosis odyssey, because it's a burden. And there are ways you can do that. The simplest way is that you can do a symptom checker to see if there are some symptoms that can be like an early signal that you have this disease, and then refer you to a diagnostic center to whether confirm that you have this disease or not. So there's a lot of things that's happening now. But again, the quality of the algorithm, the quality of all those, it's under two things. One, you need to have access to the data. And that's where I think the value of collaboration between different stakeholders, making the data available to everyone, not being owned by one party. I think it's critical. Takeda, Novartis, Janssen, and I forgot a couple of other companies, partner now with IMI and to basically set up something called Health Outcome Observatory. And this Health Outcome Observatory, it's an institute that is independent from pharma, from other stakeholders, and the value is to basically collect this data, which is owned by patient, analyze this data and benefit everyone. And those are the things that will start in the future. So that's the first thing, availability of the data. And the second element, those algorithms takes time to develop and takes time to validate. And I start now reading, because I'm not expert on that, on the concept of federated learning, because you talked about decentralized clinical trial. I think federated learning will help also accelerate the development of such algorithm.
Yeah,
whether for diagnosis or for disease management or for prediction of complications.
Yeah, beautiful. And I love that some of the aspects of the future is already here is a really good one to hang on to. I think based on the various different elements, some things were ahead than others, but at least we're on the track. And you mentioned earlier, Hicham, about the whole idea of software as a medical device. Not only are we having our regulatory bodies starting to, create regulation around this, we have the whole 510K certifications, the way trials should be done and conducted. Curious as to your thoughts of potential partnerships between the big traditional chemical entity pharma companies with some of the more consumer generated or some of the tech startups. And how are pharma companies trying to leverage these software as a medical device, either A, as an actual therapeutic, or as a potential add-on to maybe extend the longevity or the patent exclusion? Why are companies even considering this as a new type of business model?
Yeah, so let's start. I'll be maybe more specific. The examples I gave you now about identifying the right patient to benefit from a treatment or predicting a flare. I think the pharma is not selling pills. We all agree. What pharma is providing is outcome, and there are two elements here. It's you need to collect the data to demonstrate a positive outcome, but also you want to make sure that the right patient are taking the treatment, because those are the ones who will benefit most of those type of those treatment and have a superior outcome. If you take those two elements, if you use one of those arguments that I have mentioned now, flare, for instance, because you are providing recommendation either to patient or HCP, by definition, they have to be validated and CE marked or medical device type 2 or others. So I do believe that because we are going in the direction of having a lot of those algorithms that can help you either do disease management or basically even just reporting back to patient. Because if, for instance, if you provide a score to patient, you need to CE mark your solution. It has to be considered as a software as a medical device. Mm. So that's the first movement. The second movement, I believe in the near future, there are too many solutions. And what will happen is that the HCPs and the payer will say to pharma or health tech company, I'm not going to use this solution if it's not validated with evidence. And therefore it has to have a clinical evidence, but also it has to have something like a software as medical device or CE marked, because that's a way for them to filter what is good for the patient, what's worth their own time, and what's not. And I do believe that this movement would be by default.
What an interesting perspective. And that was actually bringing me to my next question, really around the new outcomes-based business models. Because at the end of the day, this is becoming very expensive. People are not only, they're not necessarily switching out, they're stacking these products. And so we continue to add and add and add, and we're not deleting. But what an interesting perspective about filtering. So in some ways, the regulators and the payers can actually ask the manufacturers to produce even more. So not only would it be the drug entity, it could be the companion diagnostic, along with some sort of an affiliated, software as a medical device or an app, and really, so what an interesting perspective. But as we start to think about healthcare costs and we start to think about the non-sustainability of the contribution of these costs to the overall, country's GDP, how is this going to be even remotely sustainable? What are some of the considerations that one needs to think about as a pharma company? For example, if you've got a legacy product that's still on, that's still being paid by Medicaid or Medicare, is it going to go off because there's some new interesting entity and they can't pay for everything?
Yeah. So to be fair, because, I speak here because I'm part of pharma, but also I'm a healthcare professional. So I work in a hospital. Pharma represents only less than 10% of the total healthcare cost. I still think that there's a huge potential of savings that needs to happen within the healthcare system. And this will finance not only new therapy, but also development of future therapies. I do believe that also when it comes to very expensive therapies, I'm not talking now about diabetic treatment, but for instance, you mentioned gene editing, cell and gene therapies. Those are very expensive therapies. And the model that is now explored by some pharma that have launched this, it's like an example, milestone-based payment, where, for instance, this treatment costs 2 million, but I will, as a payer, I will pay you 25% at administration to the patient, maybe another 25% after a year, and maybe 50% 5 years from now. And here, pharma needs to put in place structure to be able to continue working with patient and healthcare provider to collect the data, the evidence, to demonstrate to payer that the therapy is working, that patient has a normal life, and there's a positive outcome. And we're talking about long-term management here, and it's 5 years, 7 years, or even longer. And that's the only way payers will accept basically to take some of the risk. And the difficulty also with this type of therapy, you don't have a huge patient base when you do clinical trial. So, and that's why you talked before about how things might change. This is an example where you cannot do a big patient cohort. So you have to do it in very small. And then there's an agreement between pharma and payers for an outcome-based model where those patients are followed for a longer time period, and then the risk is shared between the two entities.
Absolutely. Yeah, very exciting and very interesting to see what this is all going to look like in the future. And if we're going to be buying our drugs with cryptocurrency or not. So we'll see. So talking about the future, I think it's very intriguing. I first found out about you through Curated Health, which is this phenomenal website that you have put together single-handedly that curates articles, podcasts, videos, everything that you can ever imagine is all in one place. It's really quite impressive. With all of the things that you've read and collated, what are you most excited about in the future? We're talking about everything from VR, AR, AI, and everything in between. What do you think is most predictably going to be the most exciting thing in the forefront?
What's the time frame? Is it 5 years, 10 years?
I don't know. I guess, yeah, let's actually just maybe go right out there and say, what do you think is going to pivotally change healthcare, I don't know, in the next 10 to 15 years?
I'm really excited about the concept of collaboration, because we talked a lot about collaboration, but we had a lot of barriers. Technology wasn't yet ready, and the system wasn't ready. But with COVID, I think a lot of boundaries now and a lot of walls, they were broken. And I'm really excited about that, because this will open up a lot of potential. When you start sharing your data with other companies, with other stakeholders, you might discover new treatment that no one looked at before. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I do believe in the future, we will talk more. So you say moving from sick care to healthcare. I think also we will have, not for all the therapies, we will have more treatment that will be cured, especially in oncology, in cancer. This I have a high hope for that. Who knows, maybe we will also cure diabetes, we'll cure depression. But in the future, I do believe that will be the trend, because I don't think that the chronic disease management, the way we do it today, is sustainable.
Yeah. I'm personally very excited about space exploration, because I really believe in the new material development, especially around bioprinting and the kinds of things that are going to come down from not, zero gravity space. But I'm also really excited about Elon Musk's Neuralink and the downloading of consciousness. I think there's going to be a lot of really interesting, that's way out there, but.
Yeah. Okay. Neuralink, it's very exciting, because one of the application, like immediate application, is language, where you don't need anymore to learn a new language. But I find it's pretty. It's a pity. I started learning German a couple of years ago because of my wife and because I live in Switzerland. And when you learn a language, you also learn a culture. So I think we should not put everything on digital and forget what is meaning in the life. Because a lot of people also talking about longevity. I do believe it's better to live a healthy, happier, shorter life than living a life that has no meaning but longer.
Yes.
So yes, knowledge will have a huge impact, but let's not forget what is meaningful in our life also.
Don't forget that we're human. So
exactly.
Great way to end this at the top of the hour. This was a fascinating conversation. Anybody who's interested in connecting with Hicham for all the myriad of things that he knows, but certainly also his curated health area, his website, I would love to, please check out his contact details are in the show notes below. If you're interested in this conversation, we also encourage you to check out impetusdigital.com. This is actually a place where you can determine if you want to get people, payers, patients, physicians together to start talking about these very provocative topics. What are we going to be doing in the future with software as a medical device? How are you as a company going to position yourself around patient centricity or decentralized trials or a myriad of other topics? This is precisely what we do with a series of our asynchronous and synchronous virtual collaboration touchpoints. We also would love if you could like and subscribe to our channel and would deeply appreciate if you could leave us a review on iTunes. Thank you for everybody for your time. Hicham, this was an outstanding conversation and wishing everybody a wonderful day ahead.